Please go to elithecomputerguy.com in order to view schematics, code, and more for the projects that you are learning about. Welcome back. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to check on the status of services on your Linux server, how to start, stop, and restart those services on your server. Why services are important in the Linux world and the server world is basically services are the applications that are running on your server. So if you have installed Apache 2 or Nginx or MySQL or whatever else, but the service is not actually running, then when somebody tries to go to your server in order to get a website or to get a database or something like that, they will not be able to access the service. Kind of sort of think about like if you have a desktop computer and you've installed Word on that desktop computer, but you have not opened it up, right? By opening up Word, now Word as a service has started and you can start interacting with Word. If Word is installed, but it's not open, then you can't use Word. So that's basically what we're dealing with in the services world on a Linux server, is a lot of times the reason that you're having a problem with your Linux server is simply because the service, for whatever reason, has been turned off or disabled. And so even though it's installed, even though the configuration files have been done and all that kind of stuff, if the service itself is not running, it doesn't matter. The other reason that understanding how to deal with services in the Linux world is important is because if you do any changes to configurations for things such as, let's say, your firewall, so there is a built-in firewall in Linux, or if you do changes to configuration in Apache or SQUID or anything else, basically in the Linux world, for configurations, you have a text file, and you simply go through the text file and you make modifications and edits. Well, remember, right, those modifications and edits don't actually get loaded into the service until you restart the service. So one of the problems a lot of noobs in the Linux world can have is they go in and they do all these beautiful, beautiful modifications to the configuration file, but then the server keeps doing what it was doing before. And then they get frustrated and they keep going back and back and back and they keep doing all these changes and they keep doing all these modifications. And the reason why their server is still working like it did before is because they haven't restarted the services. If you change the vhosts within the Apache configuration, but you don't restart the Apache service, then all of those configurations that you've changed will not be loaded into the service, and so the service will keep doing what it has been doing. So these are the reasons why services are very important in the Linux world. If your service is not running, then again, it's literally not running. And if you make changes to configuration files and you do not restart the service, those changes will not be loaded into the server so that the server can perform how you're expecting it to perform. Now, when we start talking about services, again, we go back to that whole, remember I was talking about that whole GNU Linux thing, the whole GNU Linux thing, and how Linux really is only the kernel, and then GNU is everything that gets put on top of it, and then that's one of the reasons why Linux can turn out to be a mess. Right, you go to Windows, like it or hate it in the Windows world, there's generally one way to do things. There's like one way to do things. You go to services and you deal with services. That's it. If you hate the control panel, it doesn't matter. If you love the control panel, it doesn't matter. Microsoft gives you one way to deal with services. Oh, but we're in the Linux world. We're in the Linux world. So what I'm going to show you today is the 3 ways that basically do the exact same thing as far as services are concerned. So even when you're doing simple things like checking the status of services, starting, restarting, stopping services, there are always multiple ways to do that in Linux. And one of the reasons why this can be confusing, especially for noobs, is because you come in and you've learned one way to do things, and then somebody else tells you a different way to do it, and then you get really confused. Or again, you go to Google, we're trying to figure out how to do something, let's say change configurations in SQUID or something like that, and then they tell you how to do something, and you're like, what? I've never seen that before. And so that's one of the problems with Linux, is it can get very confusing because you can literally have it 3 different ways to the exact same thing. So now, since we're dealing with Ubuntu, Debian, they use something called systemctl now in order to control services. So the let me say this. Let me be official here. The proper way to deal with services in Ubuntu 18.04 and going forward is something called systemctl. You use a command called systemctl, start, stop, restart, whatever status, and that is the proper way to do it. But understand, even in Ubuntu 18.04, there's also something called the service command. And so you can actually use something called sudo service and then Apache 2 or whatever the service is, start, stop, restart, status, and you basically get the exact same results. And for anybody that was dealing with Linux a little bit ago, the way that I learned to deal with services is there's also something called Init.d scripts. So there's a folder called the Init.d folder, and in that there are specific scripts, again, to deal with services, start, stop, restart, status, the whole 9 yards. The one thing that I will say is that the Init.d is deprecated. It's important to understand. Basically what deprecated means in the Linux world many times is that it still works. It's still there. It still does what it does. But there's no longer really any updates. There's no longer work being done on that way of doing things. And so when they say something is deprecated, basically what they mean is it's come to the end of the road. It does what it does. It's still within the operating system. You can still do it, but that's not how you're supposed to do it anymore. And again, so it's very important to understand in the Ubuntu world, the official way to do it is systemd. But again, something to understand, if you're going back and you're looking at documentation, and again with Linux, right? Again, if you're dealing with SQUID servers or Firewall or Apache, you may go back and you may look at some documentation from, let's say, 2012. And in 2012, Init.d scripts were the way to do things. And so you may see something where they say, modify the configuration files in such and such way, and then this is how you restart the service. And so one of the reasons I'm showing you that is just to show you that, again, at least in 18.04, it still works. It probably still work will work for a few more years. So I'm just showing you that to show you that it exists. And if nothing else, so you can, when you do see it in the future, you can go, oh, that's how they used to do it. So instead of using Init.d, I'm going to use systemd, the proper way to do it instead. So do remember, in the Linux world, one of the reasons why Linux can be so darn confusing is you literally, three ways to do something as simple as start, stop, restart, and status on services. So with that, let's go over to my computer. I can show you the exciting world of services. So here we are at my Ubuntu server. Again, we are running Ubuntu 18.04.3 LTS, but everything that I'm showing you today should work for about a decade into the future. There should not be any differences, and many of the things that I'm showing you can work 10 generations in the past. The only thing that might not work if you have an older version of Linux is the whole systemd thing. I think systemd came in 4 or 5 years ago, so it should work on any relatively new versions of Ubuntu, but I don't know if you had a distribution from, let's say, 2010. I don't think systemd would work then. But on the other hand, why the hell are you running a distribution from 2010? Type of deal. So again, it's the Linux world, that's how it goes. So this is just a standard server installation within VirtualBox. And the one thing that I have done is I have installed Apache 2. So Apache 2 is a web server service, just so that we have a service that we can interact with here. So I'm going to log in, of course. We're going to use Bob 123456. Because that's how I roll with security, and I'm gonna hit enter. So we are now logged in. I'm going to do clear in order to clear the screen. So we're gonna deal with systemd first. Again, to be clear, systemd is the proper way to deal with services in the Linux world. So the other things that I'll show you today are ways that'll end up doing the exact same thing. But the proper way is systemd. So the first thing that we can do with systemd is we can use the systemctl command for status. So to look at the status of the different services on the system. So we can do sudo systemctl and then space status. So what this is going to do is it's going to show us the status of all the services that are currently running on the system. Hit enter, since it's sudo 123456, hit enter. And now we can see different things, right? So server, the state is obviously running because we're actually interacting with it. And we can go down here and we can see a lot of just generic information that may or may not be of value to you. So one of the things that we're interested here, again, as I said before, the Apache 2 service is running. So apache2.service, that is actually running. We see this start command here. We see PIDs. And so we have this information. This right now is not overly valuable to you. I just want to kind of show you this so that you know it exists. Something that might be a lot more valuable to you is, again, if we do sudo systemctl space status, and then we actually say what service we care about. So now we're going to say that we actually care about Apache 2. So instead of getting everything, we just want to know Apache 2. I just want to know Apache 2. I just want to know MySQL, right? So if somebody's coming to my server and for some reason they're not getting the website, or let's say they're getting a web page, but it's garbage because it's obviously you're not reading from the database, I could come in here and put MySQL or Apache 2 or whatever service, right? So I put Apache 2, I hit enter, and so this tells me specifically about Apache 2. And so this is, honestly, it's just a hell of a lot more valuable than just seeing all those services. So we can see Apache.2 service. We can have some information here. Active, so it's active running. Gives them these PIDs. These are the process ID numbers. Gives me some other information. Started things, the whole 9 yards. I can hit enter. It gives me some other information here. But the big thing that I'm looking for is like, okay, so at least I know that Apache 2 is started. So we go down. Once you get to the end, it doesn't really tell you what to do. Q. Q is the answer. You hit Q and you are out of this. So now we're going to do clear to clear the screen. So to use systemctl in order to stop the service, what we'll do is we'll do sudo systemctl. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say stop Apache 2. So let's say for some reason we installed the web server on here. We're using it for some reason, but we just purely want to stop the service. We don't want anybody to be able to get to the website. We can stop. We hit enter. Then if we do sudo systemctl status Apache 2, so this will tell us the status. We hit enter. And if we go down here, we can now see inactive, dead, right? So we know that that service is not running. Then we can just hit Q to get out of that. From that point, again, if we just want to simply start the service, we can do sudo systemctl start Apache 2. This will start the service. Again, no big deal. The big one though, the big command that you're actually going to use, the one that you're actually going to use a lot, is simply the restart command. So let's say I go in, I change the configurations to php.ini, I change the configurations for the vhosts, I change configurations for some of these services. What you're going to do is the way to load those configurations actually into memory so that they're being used is by simply restarting. So we do system ctl restart Apache 2, and then you hit enter, and then again, woo, exciting. This may not seem exciting, but this right here, this is the command that you're actually going to be using on a day-to-day basis. So from that, let's go over and let's talk about the service command. So let me clear this. So let me clear the screen. And now the service command, it basically does everything I just showed you in a different way. So what we can do is sudo superuser_do. Then we're going to use a service command. And for this, to see the status of everything going on, so basically see all the services on your Linux server, you're going to do ---- status, again, if you don't type it right, it's not right, -all. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pipe this through the less. So we're going to use this up, down. This is not an L. This is that up, down, sticky thing. And then we're going to say less. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to show us things on a page. And then when it gets to the end of the page, it's going to stop. And then I'm going to have to hit enter to keep being able to see things. Because basically, when you try to look at these services, well, let me show you. When I do this, when I simply do this and I hit enter, you see how all those services scrolled by? So we got a lot of services up here that I can't see. So if I do this, but then I pipe it through less, what's going to happen is it's going to go down. It's going to show me one page of information, and then to keep going, I just hit enter line by line. Now with this, if you're going to use a service in order to check on the status, plus, so Apache 2 plus means the service is running, minus console setup, crypt disks, things like that, means the service is not running. So basically you can just do this. It's a little more graphical way. I think this might be actually be a little bit easier way of seeing what services are actually running on your box. And this just shows you all of your services. You just keep pressing enter. to get to the end, and then you can press Q to get out. Then from here, if you want to see the status of a specific service, you do sudo, and then you do service. And then what you're going to do is you're going to do the service itself, Apache 2 status. So with here, service, the name of the service, and status, we hit this, and then this gives us the same kind of thing. We got a systemd, Apache.2 service, active, running, blah, 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 blah. So that's basically how you do that there. Now in order to start, stop, restart services with this, clear the screen, all we're going to do is we're going to do sudo service, the name of the service. So for us, we're using Apache 2, and then we're going to say stop, right? So we're just going to stop the Apache 2 service. We hit enter, and there we go. If we want to then check on the status, sudo service Apache 2 status, we can now see that it is inactive, it is dead. I can hit Q, and I can get out of this. Then all I have to do in order to start the service using service is again sudo service Apache 2 start. And now we've started the service, and I'll just hit the up. So if I hit the up key, I can go back and I can look at the commands. So up and down keys scrolls through the commands that I've been using. So with this, again, if you change configuration files, anything like that, so you want that to get loaded into memory so that the server is actually using those new configuration files, you can simply do restart, and voila, you have now restarted the Apache 2 service. So that right there is basically how you deal with the service command in order to deal with services on the Ubuntu box. So from there, let's go to the Init.d scripts. So with that, let me clear the thing, and we're going to deal with Init.d scripts. Again, to be clear, these are deprecated. They are deprecated, but you know, for some reason, you may see them in instructions. You may know how to use them, whatever else. They still work. Again, as with many things in Linux, it still works. So with this, it's a little bit weirder because you actually have to give a full path to where you're going. So we're going to do sudo, and then what you're going to do is you're going to do /, so root directory, etc folder, so root directory, etc folder, and then something called the init .d folder. All right, so this is an actual folder. And then in here, there are going to be the different services, and they have different scripts that you can run. So with this, what I can do is I can do Apache 2, and then I can give the argument of something such as status. So what we're doing here is we do sudo, obviously, then the root directory, etc, init.d folder. In there is going to be something called an Apache 2 script, and then we're going to feed it an option. So for us, we're going to feed it the status option. We're going to hit enter, and then, oh, that's right, with this, it actually gives us too much information. This is one of the problems you get into in the Linux world. Sometimes it gives you more information than can fit on the screen. So we're going to pipe this through less, hit enter, and so here it gives us just the amount of information we need for one page. So Apache2.service, it is loaded, so it is running, it's active, running, gives us some more information, gives us those PID numbers that don't really matter right now. I can keep hitting enter, and then I can get to the end, and then I can hit Q. Q is what exits. So that's a way that I can see the status of the service. If I want to stop a service, again, sudo /etc /init.d /Apache 2, and then I can stop the service. I can hit enter. And then with this, you actually get a little bit different. You actually get this readout. You get a message from the server. So that's something to realize. If we go up and we want to take a look at the status, we can do this. So again, etc init.d Apache 2 status, and we're piping that through less, less. And so for here, we can come down here. We can see status is as inactive. It is dead. I hit Q to escape. Then if I want to start the service again, sudo /etc /init.d /Apache2 /start. And now it's started. We can do the same thing and do restart. and now it's restarted. So those are the 3 ways you are able to interact with the services on an Ubuntu server. Again, systemd. Systemd is the proper way to deal with it. But frankly, these other ones work. And so if you see these other ways of dealing with services and instructions somewhere, it's up to you. As long as it works, I mean, at the end of the day, you're stopping and starting services. As long as the service stops and as long as the service starts, that's all that really matters. Is do what you want to do. So there you go. There's like a 20-minute class literally on how to deal with services in the Linux world. If this was Microsoft, I'd open up the service panel, you'd right-click, start, stop, restart, and that would be about it. But that's Microsoft world. This is Linux. In Linux, you have 3 different ways to essentially do the exact same thing. Again, in the Ubuntu world, at this point, they use something called systemd. Systemd uses the command systemctl, and so that is the proper way to deal with services in the Ubuntu world. But do realize the service command will also work, and Int.d scripts actually still work even though they have been deprecated. As with all of these things, there are more arguments, there are more options. You can go and read the man pages if you want to learn more about these commands that I showed you today, but I showed you the ones that you are generally going to need. And honestly, the 2 that you're generally going to need is status, is the service running, and restart. Those are the ones that you actually generally use. Starting, just purely starting and stopping, depends on what you're doing, but you don't normally just start and stop services willy-nilly in the Linux world. The one option, the one argument I did not show you today is actually something called reload, which is kind of interesting. What reload does is basically you can give the option, and the idea is it reloads the configuration file without fully restarting the service. So theoretically, in the real world, this should be a faster way to load the new configurations that you've created into the service and keep it running. It's not something that I've done in the past. I always restart services, to be honest with you. Maybe I'm an old guy. Maybe old people restart services. I took a look into it a lot more. You can have some weird quirks with the reload command. Like sometimes the configuration file doesn't fully load. You get some quirks. It's Linux. You can run into problems. So what I would say is you might want to take a look at the reload option just to know that it's there. I find, especially when you're dealing with Apache 2 or SQUID or any of these basic services on a Linux box, restarting the service is so quick. I'm not sure I'm willing to risk quirks for a few microseconds of speed. And again, in the real world, if you're running, it's an important thing to think about. Like if you're running these service things in a script or something like that, it may be valuable. A couple of microseconds, microseconds might actually matter. I would say if you're actually sitting there at the command line, and again, you've got any decent speed server, it probably won't be an issue. But there is the reload option, and so that's something that you might want to take a look at. Yes, I do know it exists. I did not teach it to you today because it might cause you problems, especially as a noob, if you reload and things don't load properly. So anyways, just something for you to realize there. So that's how to check on the status, stop, start, and restart services in the Linux world. As always, I enjoyed doing this video and look forward to seeing you at the next one.